one of our women talks about this as such an important aspect of her leadership journey, because we need multiple role models to help inspire us. So we have these great stories coming through, and that's really how the book evolved.
Hello, I'm Christy Kitson, Learning and Development Strategist at Iventive, and I'm joined today by Dr. Shaheena Janjuha-Jivraj, Associate Professor at HEC Paris, based in Qatar. Shaheena has joined us a few times before in Dubai, speaking expertly on next generational leaders, fostering an entrepreneurial mindset, and diversity as a driver of innovation. Shaheena's research focuses on leadership, gender and innovation, challenging leadership norms, mindset, diversity, risk-taking, empathy, all kinds of fascinating things. You were recently crowned an icon of excellence in diversity, innovation, entrepreneurial leadership by Inc. Media, and we would love to delve into your experiences that led you to this point. So if you don't mind just introducing yourself and talking to us a bit about what it was that really ignited this passion for you.
Thanks so much, Christy. And it's quite a mouthful, right, when you're talking about diversity, innovation, and entrepreneurial leadership. But for me, this is kind of the framework that I do all my work in. So my career started actually about 25 years ago, teaching entrepreneurship. So I was teaching entrepreneurship in UK universities, various business schools, Brunel Business School, and then subsequently Henley Business School, and doing a lot of work in encouraging entrepreneurial thinking. And the more and more work I did in this area, I realized that you need a diversity of thinking. And so rather than just teaching business school students, I would try to get students from other faculty into the classroom. And that's when you really saw a different level of thinking and different quality of ideas. When you then start to think about diversity and how we think about it today in terms of whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's age, all the different characteristics we have, we've spent a lot of time over the last few decades making sure that we recruit the right people and we have the right teams and that right sort of composition at the table. But now the real focus is on leadership, because actually to jump from diverse teams to innovation, and we know there's research that talks about the correlation between diversity and innovation, you actually need really strong leadership. And it's a very different model of leadership compared to leadership models that have happened before. You've got to have a much more entrepreneurial mindset. You need to encourage that within teams, have strong elements of psychological safety, and really be willing to say to teams, let's go on this experimentation, let's have that learning mindset, growth mindset, all those wonderful things we're talking about, but actually really pulling them into this toolkit of leadership. And so for me, and this is something I've always done, I've worked in this space now for about 15 years, but even starting with diversity, you always have to, I believe, start with the business case, because you're asking people to shift behavior. And this is a change agenda, and people need to be willing to put resources, time and effort into it. So they have to have some idea of what the benefits are from a business perspective, from a performance perspective, and even from a personal performance perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's fascinating, and it sounds like it goes much beyond that, where I suppose this conversation started in terms of that diversity of thought, and you mentioned the psychological safety. So I think because of the work that you've done recently around women in leadership, and your book, Take the Lead, How Women Leaders Are Driving Success Through Innovation, could you tell us a little bit more about that work perhaps, and highlight some of the key takeaways behind some of the research and the book itself?
Sure. So again, this is the fourth book I've co-authored. I've written one book and co-authored 3 books. The journey of this book is really interesting as well, because I'm now based in Qatar. I've been here for 3 years, and we have been running women's leadership programs in the region, and in very male-dominated sectors, so oil and gas, banking and finance as well. And one of the things we wanted to do as we developed these women's programs, we wanted to make sure that they kind of super boosted leadership for women. So it wasn't seen as the women need help and therefore are attending these women's programs at a disadvantage to their male colleagues. And we put innovation and creativity at the heart of the program. And this comes back to my triangle, you know, that to get to innovation, you need a different model of leadership. And if you understand what the value is of that leadership and see it through innovation, then your whole game changes. The way you think about things, your leadership changes. So in the last 18 months or so, we have delivered programs for 150 women in the region. And that's huge. It's a really big deal. The great thing about the women's programs we've been developing, we're now moving into a different level around Take the Lead and launching a women's leadership certificate, which gives women a chance to delve deeper into understanding their leadership as they move from middle into senior leadership roles. And this does a number of things. So building on all the theory that we developed in the book, but getting women to really think about what this means at C-suite level, board level, and really, really importantly, how they strengthen their capabilities, how they build those very, very strong connections with each other and the outside environment, and really, really understanding what their leadership strengths are in terms of bringing the value of diversity, which we know matters to decision making, but having that up front and center in the way they think about how they perform, how they interact, and how they deal with colleagues. As we started to develop the program, obviously, when you're talking to women about leadership, you're working on multiple levers, right? Because you're focusing on lots of things. You're going in to think about different models of leadership. You're getting them to think about, the things that we often know create barriers for women. So we talk about institutional barriers, but we come at it from the perspective of challenging learned helplessness. So, okay, there are barriers. You can't go in, no one is going to be able to fix unconscious bias, subconscious biases in organizations. So how do you start navigating around it? How do you deal with microaggressions? How do you actually really challenge concepts around imposter syndrome? So my approach within the programs has been to take these big chunky areas, look at it from a research perspective, acknowledge the research, and then say, right, this is how you navigate around it. So we created this canvas. We had 7 C's, and as that developed, and we kept using it for the women, because again, for us, it's really important that the women come to the program from where they are and they develop their leadership from where they are. It's not about creating a certain type of leadership that everybody goes out of the program with a very specific way of leading and having to adhere to this sort of typecast, but actually helping them play to their strengths and understand what that means and how that operates for them in their world of work. And we kept testing. I said to you, I taught entrepreneurship, so I'm a huge believer in iteration, proof of concept. Go in, test it, see how it works. And actually from there, the book emerged. So the book literally works alongside the program. And we took these 7 C's that we actually turned from a canvas into the concept of a boat, because you need to navigate your career forward. And the beauty with the boat is you can take various directions, and the sailing analogies give us so many great ways of thinking about careers, particularly for women. And we took each of these and started to explore them in a chapter. Each chapter covers one of these 7 C's. And, there's that tongue-in-cheek irony, 7 C's, boat navigation, it all just starts to play together. But what I've always done in my books is I've always had stories, real life stories, because the research it's great, but it can get a bit dry. And we were able to interview women from across the world. So we had Europe, North America, Asia, Middle East. We've had amazing women share their stories around each of these areas. So whether we're talking about courage, or we're talking about connections, or we're talking about the importance of champions, each of these women share a story and share what that looks like for them. And actually for us, that's really important. And we went for women who were not kind of, the typical women you'd find in business magazines and business websites, because we know these women are phenomenal. But what we wanted to do was diversify the role models and the sort of build different profiles of women that anybody picking up the book would say, I can relate to this woman. I see what she's saying, and start to build what we call composite role models. One of our women talks about this as such an important aspect of her leadership journey, because we need multiple role models to help inspire us. So we had these great stories coming through. And that's really how the book evolved. And again, one of our 7 C's is creativity. So again, for you innovation is underpinned by creativity. It's underpinned by curiosity. And you really need to know yourself well and be confident in your abilities to come out with these wonderful, crazy ideas that bring in new approaches to services, business models, dealing with customers. And so that's also been a really big part of the book.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that concept of the self-knowledge in terms of part of the journey. So, I mean, I was curious by the 7 C's concept and the fact that you do have these this global network from which to pull these stories for your composite role models. Are there any patterns and things that you're noticing, or you have noticed in the course of the program or the research or the writing of the book, in terms of maybe some of those learned helplessnesses, or any of the ways that people are able to overcome them, women in a network perhaps?
So there were a couple of things. I mean, the previous book, or the book number 2 I wrote, called Championing Women Leaders. This was based on research we had carried out across 52 countries. So it was some research funded by the UK government to look at the Commonwealth, to look at women in leadership across the Commonwealth. And again, it was phenomenal because we had such a richness of diversity in terms of the women leaders we were speaking to, the backgrounds they came from, socioeconomic diversity of their environments. And the things we saw consistently with these women, they had a role model who was accessible to them from a young age. So it was a teacher, it was a neighbor, it was an aunt, it was somebody who even a parent, and sometimes more often than not fathers, not always mothers, who provided that impetus to say, I believe in you, you can do this. So the stretch piece being really important. And we know we need the big inspirational posters talking about women who are successful, but for me, I'm really interested in those people who've had a direct impact on individuals' lives and how they've seen them through in those times when somebody doesn't quite believe in themselves. And especially as, young girls, the messages we get are not always positive and very, very stereotypical. So that was huge. The other thing we found was, again, taking that concept of belief and stretch. We found that women had champions, and this is a more nuanced view of sponsorship. So we all know about the importance of sponsorship. We know this was such a breakthrough when it came out. But within years of the concept of sponsorship emerging, research showed that men were still being over-sponsored and women were being over-mentored. And by sponsorship, we're talking about a senior leader, talking about you in a meeting or a room where you have no visibility and access. And mentoring, it's me talking to you about your career, but that's not going to advance your career, whereas sponsorship is advocacy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took a much more nuanced view, where we shifted the emphasis from you going out and you finding a sponsor to senior leaders taking that responsibility and making it a much more institutional approach. And that actually has been consistent, that when we talk to leaders, whether it was that book, the championing book, or even the current book, having those champions. And now women, it's becoming much, much more common. Women turn around and say, I didn't realize, but actually, yeah, I had that champion. This is what he was doing. And when you help them make sense of it, they realize what they can do to actually keep that support going, because it's as important as ever. Our data showed that probably only 15%, I think it was about only 15% of the women we surveyed, around 1,000 women, have a champion. So still a lot more work needs to be done in this space. Just because we know about it, we now need to put it into practice. So championing is one thing. The other thing that's a really interesting trend coming through, and I think it's linked to this idea about job crafting. So what we were starting to see with the women, quite senior women, they've started creating their own roles. And again, you think about what that means in terms of the concept of a boat and navigating your career. There's a point when you have enough expertise, you have enough credibility, depending if you're working in the right organization, you have the potential to be able to start crafting your role in a much more hands-on way. And again, this was something we saw in the third book, Future Proof Your Career, where we had a couple of women saying, I was due to leave. I'd finished my tenure in the organization, and the chairman said, I don't want to lose you. What do you want to do? And created roles for them. And this was a pattern we saw emerging much more in this book. So I think this is where there's something really interesting in the world of work, because there is flux. We've got a group of women coming through who have been absolutely exceptional in their leadership. They have zigzagged. So they've built a very broad portfolio of careers, knowledge, skill sets, and they are invaluable to organizations. And the really astute organizations are saying, we need to figure out how we hold on to that talent and very pragmatically create different roles for these individuals. And that, to me, is the epitome of an entrepreneurial mindset for leadership.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating, actually. Job crafting as a concept of retention and really retaining that, as you say, when someone's got such a broad spectrum and such a deep knowledge of an enterprise and an organization, holding on to that is really interesting. I was just wondering if we could return to the concept of champions. Do you get any, when you're discussing this with business leaders, do you get any pushback from those organizations, or is it something that they can inherently see the value in doing and bringing?
I'm smiling because I get a response, and I have a standard response to it now. So often I'm told, oh, we do mentoring. We run mentoring programs for women. And I've become quite firm about this and say, mentoring is a very cheap way of feeling that you're doing something that's good without actually creating the impact. And I'm quite blunt about this now, because the thing is, the definition, we know what mentoring is, right? You need somebody to mentor you, talk through with you what your career challenges are. I'm talking to you. We need still a lot more visibility, so that the level above you, the level above your manager, sees your potential. And so I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding between mentoring and championing. I think people think they're doing championing when really they're just mentoring. And mentoring is cheaper. I mean, mentoring is a lot cheaper and we have some phenomenal mentoring initiatives, so I'm not knocking them. But at the same time, you need a suite of programs in place. You can't just have mentoring and assume that women will rise to the top. You need that leader who has a much, much more sort of wider view, and from their vantage point can say, here's the potential of this person, and actually I know how this can support, and these stretch roles can help her. So when I think about championing, it's a very powerful way of addressing imposter syndrome, and this is one of my bugbears as well, because imposter syndrome is a form of learned helplessness. So you'll have amazingly successful women who will have that inner critic saying, you don't deserve this role, you're not good enough to do this role. And we've had great, there's been a lot of awareness, which is helpful. But I too often see women sort of almost saying, yeah, I have imposter syndrome, and they just wait to be saved. And actually, to me, the antidote of imposter syndrome is stretch. Taking on stretch roles. The more you build your self-efficacy, the more you take on roles that are scary, that there's a risk of failure. I'm not asking you to go out and jeopardize everything, but you build your self-efficacy, you build your ability, your resilience to take on roles that are a little bit terrifying, that allow you to stretch your skills. The imposter syndrome is handled, because next time you're taking on that big scary role, you will look back and say, but I did this, this, and this, and you know what? I made some mistakes, but I managed. It's learning, right? It's all about learning. And the thing is, sometimes you need, or more often than not, you need that champion to say, I believe in you. I know you can do this. I'm going to be here to protect you, but you're going to go and do this, and I'm here supporting you. And that's the role of a champion. It's so critical, because you often can't do that on your own. You need that senior leader just nudging you, pushing you forward.
Absolutely. As you say, to have that advocate in the room, to be the unlocker for that stretch, for that role that's going to take you outside of your comfort zone and allow you to prove to yourself, I can do this. And so you have that in your mind when you're next considering a bigger role or a task or a project. Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for that insight. If I could shift the focus now to the women who might be the target audience of the book, for example. So if, to women who are looking to take the lead in their careers, what key piece of advice would you give to them? I suppose I know the book touches on an awful lot, but if you had a sort of a key piece of advice you would give.
Well, first of all, I would say go and read the book. Really important to read the book. Three of us, we were writing this book during very busy periods. So my colleagues, Anne Valerie, who's based in Paris, and Delphine Nahor, who's based in the UK, we wrote this book in 6 months, hardly being together. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but it was incredibly intense to write this book, not being in the same space, let alone the same time zones as well. And I think one of the things I've learned more and more over time, because you want to do something, you've just got to not be scared and get on with it and do it. Build those collaborations, build that support. I think, right now there's a lot of emphasis and spotlight on women's leadership. There are a lot of mixed messages out there in terms of what it means to be a woman who is a leader. The media spotlight is harsh. I think we're seeing some really, really mixed messages across the world, and I think that makes it really tough. But I think really importantly, support yourself with your tribe. Get your tribe of women and men who are supporting you, and be laser sharp, laser focused on why you're doing it. And make sure you have your expertise, you know, your subject matter expertise, your knowledge. That is it, it has to be absolutely brilliant. And then you just go for it and you have fun. So research from the World Economic Forum shows it will now take about 130 years to reach gender parity. Pre-COVID, it was 100 years. This is global, so it varies depending on where in the world you are. But it's got worse because of the results of the pandemic and recovery from that. So we're now talking 5 generations to achieve gender parity. And that's really, really sobering. And the thing we have to remember, there is a lot of good work going on. We look online, we go into programs, we'll see a huge amount of good work going on. We have to make sure that it's impactful. A lot of people jump into the space because they're passionate about it. For me, it's always critical you have an evidence base to what you're doing, and then you can go in and start challenging. But also, it's not a kind of one and then done thing, right? We have to keep pushing because you can't assume progress is linear. In fact, we see, you know, we've seen legislation going backwards. We're seeing attitudes going back. But we also can't, this is a bit of my kind of rally cry, we can't opt out because we have to keep things moving. Otherwise that 130 years will actually get worse. It's not getting better. So that's the harsh truth. But at the same time, doing it with, you know, it's got to be fun. We have to enjoy doing it. And we have to have people around us to make sure that we feel supported and we have enjoyment and satisfaction in what we do and a laugh.
So what are the kind of things that people can be doing day to day to ensure that they are continuing to push towards progress in that respect?
You know, I think, okay, so first of all, be well informed, have the right information. Make sure that, you know, what you're looking at, whether it's the sound bites and you're using, you know, language around imposter syndrome, glass ceiling, whatever, make sure that you have the right data and the right information. Okay, be informed. There's so much material out there that is great for sound bites, but it's not accurate and correct. Make sure that the work you do is absolutely credible and it's strong. You know, I mean, when you asked me earlier about how leaders react to the championing piece, at the beginning, we had to keep explaining it's not about entitlement. And I still say this time and again, just because you are picked to attend programs as a woman, it does not mean you're necessarily going to have the escalator getting you to the top. And rightly or wrongly, however you feel in relation to what else is going on, but the work has to be absolutely sound and absolutely credible. And use the network, use your connections, build your connections, be a connector, be the person who's introducing other people to each other and share. And be the person who lifts everybody, because if the more you lift, you can only be as good as those around you. And if you're not lifting, then yes, you're the tallest poppy there, but it doesn't help, because actually one of the big things I'm a huge advocate of now, I'm done with talking about putting a woman on a pedestal, because actually it's very easy to knock that pedestal. We need to build platforms. You put 20 women on that platform, if one jumps off for very good reasons, she can be replaced with somebody, but you can't dismantle a platform as easily as you can kick down a pedestal. So the power of collectivity for me is huge. The power of connections, personal accountability, responsibility is really big, and make sure you have the right information. And I would also say, you know, spend time investing in yourselves. It still surprises me how difficult it is for women to step up and either advocate to get into leadership programs, or for their companies to do that, or for them to see the value of it. So I think these things are hugely important. I think, you know, there's a lot we talk about within the book, but one of the key areas that I'm really keen to talk about today, we talk about the power of connections. And we purposely positioned it away from networking, we positioned it away from social capital. We know, I mean, we live in an age where we're hyper connected and we have so many ways that we can interact with each other, but actually really developing deep and meaningful connections is really important. And when we developed the connections as one of our C's, we had a really long conversation about what that means and how that works for women at work. I think, you know, we've got a lot better at having women supporting other women. I think we still need to go further than that, a lot further. I think still where you have organizations or cultures where you have women in the minority as leaders, you still sometimes get the queen bee syndrome. And that's that we still need to get over. But you know, the really important piece for me there is, I think today more than ever we're looking for deeper connections. So it's about actually, you know what, investing time with each other, finding those people that you want to spend time with, you want to share knowledge with. We're very good at recognizing whether someone is genuine with this or whether somebody is just looking to get something. But at the same time, and this is one of the assumptions that I also want to challenge, because I love busting assumptions and challenging them. We somehow, and again, I came across some research by Amartya Sen years ago, looking at male and female networks. And in that research, you know, it found that male networks had a higher social capital value than female-only networks. And of course, this intrigued me. So I went in and started doing more work in this area. And what we see, men are very, very good at asking for things from their networks. Women are absolutely brilliant at building relationships, but they don't ask. And so I will often say to women on the programs, ask, don't just build your followers on LinkedIn, don't just build your connections, don't, you know, whether it's your WhatsApp groups, whatever it is, what is the purpose? And often I get pushback saying, well, you know, that's very transactional, like it's not about using my network. But actually, the value of the network comes when you can crystallize that potential into something. So whether you're asking for insights into how do I address this problem with my team, or you know, I'm looking for a new supplier, or I'm looking for a new contract, or whatever, but actually asking. And on a personal level, I can see it, you know, I will more often than not get male connections reaching out and asking me, can you do this, this, and this for me, even if I haven't met them. Female connections far less. So anecdotally, I see it, but the research also speaks to that. And I think, you know, I think also once you're more comfortable with yourself and recognizing you've got knowledge to share, then you're more likely to build those, to sort of strengthen those connections and develop stronger relationships. I see it also with the way you guys work at Iventive, because the way you develop your conversations, it's such a natural flow of allowing subject matter expertise to come out, and it's so comfortable. And you build such great connections. People I met 2 years ago, we still speak to whenever we're in the same city. We make sure we meet up for a coffee. And I think it's a really powerful way of walking the talk about collaboration and connecting.
That's fantastic to hear, and obviously that's exactly what we strive for. And I think it speaks a lot to what we try and create in the room in terms of the group and the psychological safety and the cohesiveness. So it's really fantastic to hear that that bears fruit and really does help you. If I can push you a slightly more personal direction, could I ask you, is there a champion that you've had in your career, or maybe a number, someone that springs to mind that's sort of helped you along?
Oh, a few. I think I've been very fortunate, and I'm very purposeful in using the word fortunate rather than lucky. I'm very fortunate to have had some really powerful champions, and individuals who've been really inspirational. I think the obvious ones that really spring to mind, in fact, one of my co-authors who I spent about 10 years working with as well, if not longer, Kitty Chisholm, we became, my very first lecturing role, I was a junior lecturer. She was very senior within my university. And, you know, I would find any opportunity to try and meet with her and have a coffee, because she was just this inspirational figure. And we talk about this in the book. We actually got to write the book together. We got to work together. But it's so funny when you sit down with somebody who's been such a big influence in your life, because you realize how you see it so differently. And she would often find opportunities and ways to keep me, to get me into bids and proposals and put me in front of people, whereas I just thought this was someone who was like a breath of fresh air in my world of academia. And she kept pushing me, you know, she would push me. And I mean, we ended up running a business together. So we kind of went from championing to partnerships. I think also what I hadn't realized at the time, one of my very first professors who taught me so much about how I teach entrepreneurship today, Professor Adrian Woods, and he passed away some years ago, but I hadn't understood how much he was pushing me. And it's only now when I look back and I think, you know, he was so forward thinking in the way he did things, but even when I doubted myself, he would push. So I had these external factors. And then of course, you know, family, my parents, just, there was always that sort of, you know, just keep going, being very creative, all of those things. And then, of course, and I think one of the most important things we think about are our partners. But my husband is just phenomenal, because there were times when you just said, I can't do this. And he would just say, yeah, of course you can, like, just keep going. So it takes a team, right? It does take a team. And I think the other thing, I think we get very caught up in what is this person going to give to me in terms of getting me up the career ladder. But I think one of the things that's really important as well is, what can I learn from this person?
Right,
What do I learn if I observe this person and how they're operating? They are going to champion me, they're going to advocate for me, but what can I learn from being with this person? How are they interacting? What are they doing with others? How are they building networks? How are they building networks and actually becoming a connector, rather than the person who's just grabbing everything? So I think again, having that really open learning mindset to say, what can I learn? And even today, at this point in my career, I'm really, really, really grateful for the fact that I learn probably more than I actually give to people. And that, I think, is a big part of the championing piece. If I look around and see who the champions have been for me, and are for me, they're not necessarily directly in my workplace, but it's that community around. And once you know what you're looking for, you start finding more of that community. And now I've got a great tribe of women I work with, and they're pretty phenomenal.
I was going to say, it sounds almost like it's a reciprocal relationship, right? So you spoke a couple of times about some champions that you had that you didn't necessarily realize were champions at the time that they were, certainly at the beginning. And then as that develops and you say it turned into a partnership, I suppose that's going to help you to build that network to which you can reach out and ask for advice and a second lens on something. So that's really interesting. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time and for joining us today, and for sharing your fascinating insights. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you.